Shalom, YouTube. God bless you all. May you all read your Bibles today. May you all follow the Torah. May you all follow the Gospels, because time is short and we need to do what God said. When they're putting YouTube videos out there, when they're putting Super Bowl commercials out there of the aliens making contact, and it's not even like they're just showing, oh, this is all CGI stuff. No, they're showing Walt Disney talking about flying saucers. They're showing footage of the UFOs that we've seen on the news. They are showing, basically what they're showing is that it's happening very, very soon. Kind of like with 9/11, how they were foreshadowing it and everybody kind of knew something was going to happen with those Twin Towers. Everybody knew that Osama bin Laden was up to something. Oh, he's a boogeyman. He's out in the desert. What's he going to do? Yeah, well, the flood myth. The flood myth or the deluge myth. So, real quick. So, read your Bibles. Everything in the Bible's historically, genealogically, prophetically accurate. The Bible is a magic book. That's all there is to it. There's no logical explanation for how the Bible can be so accurate about everything, except that it is a divinely ordained book from God. Period. And all the witchcraft books are just corruptions of the Bible. All this black magic, all these pagan myths, their God is weaker than our God. But our God's a perfectionist, and our God demands that we follow the Torah and the Gospels with all our heart, with all our soul, with all our strength. So the flood myths. I'm going to be proving that all the pagan myths tie into the stories in Genesis, specifically speaking about the great flood and the creation of mankind from clay. Because the scientists say that there was no great flood, that they say that the Grand Canyon formed over millions of years, even though the Indians of that region talk about that it was formed by the Great Flood. And there's other regions as well. You can see traces of the Grand Canyon all over the United States. You can see it from California to Arizona to Utah, Red Rock Amphitheater. I mean, there's all this great erosion that occurred. And this is the flood myth. So let's just get into it. The flood myth is a myth in which a great flood, usually sent by a deity or deities, destroys civilization, often in an act of divine retribution. Parallels are often drawn between the flood waters of these myths, and the primeval waters which appear in certain creation myths. So the primeval waters, I think what it's referring to is the firmament. So Genesis chapter 1, you can read about what the firmament is. The face of the earth is the plane of the earth. It's not a globe, it's a face. You don't find a face on a ball. But above the face of the earth is the firmament of heaven, the waters above. And this window opened and drowned everything on earth, and then the waters went right back up to heaven. The primeval waters, which appear in certain creation myths, as the flood waters are described as a measure for the cleansing of humanity in preparation for rebirth. Most flood myths also contain a culture hero who represents a human craving for life. So the mythologies. Flood myth motifs occur in many countries, including Manvantara Sandhya in Hinduism, Deucalion and Pyrrha in Greek mythology, the Genesis flood narrative, the Mesopotamian flood stories, and the Cheyenne flood story. I believe the Cheyenne are the Indians of the United States. But really, these are everywhere. You can find these myths on practically every single continent on the planet, and this makes sense. If Noah and his sons are the ancestors of all humanity, it makes sense that these myths would be firmly ingrained into our societies. It's the atheists who are giving us false explanations for everything. It's the atheists who are saying the Great Flood's a myth. It's the atheists who say we come from monkeys. But the myths say that the flood happened and we come from clay, that God or gods made us from clay. So one example of a flood myth is in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Many scholars believe that his account was copied from the Akkadian Atrahasis, which is similar to Noah's Ark, which dates to the 18th century before Christ. In the Gilgamesh flood myth, the highest god Enlil, who is essentially the same as Baal, Zeus, Dagon, Allah, Hubal, it's all the same. It's a false version of God. It's a corruption of Yahweh. It's not Yahweh. He doesn't act like Yahweh in the Bible. He acts like a very petty child who wants to destroy everybody who gets in his way. And he teaches corruptions of the Bible stories. So we'll start with what Enlil is. So Enlil in the pagan myths is the brother of Enki, and he wants to flood the world because humanity is annoying to him. We're making too much noise, so he wants to drown us. You can read about this in the it's not Enuma Elish, but it's one of those. Anyway, it's not important. He decides to destroy the world with a flood because humans have become too noisy. The god Yah, they named the god Yah to confuse it with Yahweh. So Yah and Enki are the same. The god Yah, who had created humans out of clay and divine blood, corruptions of the Genesis story, which obviously these stories are older than the book of Genesis. Moses just wrote it back down in 1500 before Christ. But these stories happen around 4000 before Christ. The god Yah, who had created humans out of clay and divine blood, secretly warns the hero Utnapishtim of the impending flood and gives him detailed instructions for building a boat so that life may survive. Both the Epic of Gilgamesh and Atrahasis, yeah, I think it was Atrahasis, that's right. Epic of Gilgamesh and Atrahasis are preceded by the similar Sumerian creation myth. The oldest surviving example of such a flood myth narrative, known from tablets found in the ruins of Nippur in the late 1890s and translated by this Assyriologist. So these flood myths, we can find them all over. I'm going to look for a list. So the Hebrew Genesis, the god Yahweh who created man out of the dust of the ground, decides to flood the earth because of the corrupted state of mankind. Yahweh then gives the protagonist Noah instructions to build an ark in order to preserve human and animal life. When the ark is completed, Noah, his family, and representatives of all the animals of the earth are called upon to enter the ark. When the destructive flood begins, all life outside of the ark perishes. After the waters recede, all those aboard the ark disembark and have Yahweh's promise that he will never flood the earth with a flood again. Yahweh causes a rainbow to form as a sign of this promise. In Hindu mythology, texts such as Satapatha Brahmana and the Puranas contain the story of a great flood, wherein Matsya, avatar of the Vishnu, warns the first man Manu of the impending flood and also advises him to build a giant boat. In Zoroastrian Mazdaism, Ahriman tries to destroy the world with a drought, which Mithra ends by shooting an arrow into a rock from which a flood springs. One man survives in an ark with his cattle. Norbert Ottinger argues that the story of Yima and the Vara was originally a flood myth, and the harsh winter was added in due to the dry nature of eastern. It doesn't matter. In Plato's Timaeus, written in 360 before Christ, Timaeus describes a flood myth similar to the earlier versions. In it, the bronze race of humans angers the high god Zeus with their constant warring. Zeus decides to punish humanity with a flood. The titan Prometheus, who had created humans from clay. So Prometheus, in this case, is the same as Enki, and Zeus, in this case, is the same as Enlil. But obviously, these are corruptions of Yahweh. The titan Prometheus, who had created humans from clay, tells the secret plan to Deucalion, who I believe is his illegitimate son, advising him to build an ark in order to be saved. After 9 nights and days, the water starts receding and the ark lands on a mountain. The Cheyenne, a North American Great Plains tribe, believe in a flood that altered the course of their history, perhaps occurring in the Missouri River Valley. Unfortunately, it doesn't go into detail, but I remember reading about one of the Indian races, and they had a flood myth that was almost identical to Noah's Ark. I mean, like right down to he releases a pigeon, he releases a crow, the crow comes back, he releases a pigeon, the pigeon brings back an olive branch. Like, I remember reading a story just like that. So they claim that it's because the ice age melted, and it's like, oh, so this is what happened. Atlantis sank because the ice age melted, and blah blah blah. But no. So let's get into the list. So this is just like a little. This is just like a little summary of these things. Let's get right to the lists. So here's the list of the flood myths. Going back to the Bronze Age, which I believe is what happened after the flood. I think we start off with the Stone Age with Adam and Eve, and then we get to the Great Flood around 1300 to 1700 years later. You can read about this in the Book of Jubilees for the clock. And after the Great Flood, I think the Bronze Age begins. This is the beginning of agriculture and all that stuff. But let's get into it. So Africa. Although the continent has relatively few flood legends, African cultures preserving an oral tradition of a flood include the Kwaya, Mabuti, Masi, Mandin, and Yoruba peoples. It doesn't go into detail what it says. One flood myth in Egyptian mythology involves the god Ra and his daughter Sekhmet. Ra sent Sekhmet to destroy part of humanity for their disrespect and unfaithfulness, which resulted in the gods overturning wine jugs to simulate a great flood of blood, so that by getting her drunk on the wine, it caused her to pass out her slaughter, and her slaughter would cease. Algonquin peoples have myths about the floods. Anishinaabe, Choctaw, Comox, Cree, all these Indians, Hopi mythology. Look at all these Indians and their myths about floods. Popol Vuh Huracan caused the fall of the wooden people by way of a great flood. And look at all these myths. It doesn't go, unfortunately, it doesn't go into detail about it though. I wish it was really going to go into detail. Um, all right, so this one in Iran, the Videvdad mentions that Ahura Mazda warns Yima that there will be a harsh winter storm followed by melting snow. Ahura Mazda advises Yima to construct a vara, which is an enclosure, basically like a boat. This he is to populate with the fittest of men and women, and with two of every bird, animal, and plant, and supply with food and water gathered the previous summer. This is very similar to the Jewish myth, to the Jewish story. So we can see many examples of this exact same story. I mean, realistically speaking, it makes absolutely no sense that this is not based in reality. Otherwise, the stories would not repeat all over the world. The Great Flood is a historical event. It's recorded all over the world and all these different peoples. Look at all this. Europe, ancient Greek flood myths. See, they're not going into detail about it. A water holding frog awoke one morning with an extreme thirst, began to drink until all the fresh water was consumed. All right. Obviously, don't not all of these have very much to do with the biblical flood story, but it's it's strange to say the least. But the next one, this is definitive that God or gods made humanity from clay, including the Hawaiian myth, where woman was taken from the side of man. Perhaps I should have started the video with this one. The creation of life from clay is a miraculous birth theme that appears throughout world religions and mythologies. Here's Prometheus creating man from clay. Here is the creation of Adam from a block of clay. Here is Khnum, a creator god who forms humans and gods out of clay. And here Isis gives life. Genesis 2:7. And the Lord God, Yahweh Elohim, formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. According to the Quran, God made man from clay. Obviously, the Quran is a corruption of the Bible. Don't take it literally. The Quran, it's ironic because the Quran is constantly praising the Torah and the Gospels, and the Muslims refuse to read the Torah or the Gospels. So, Islam is like a false path to salvation. In Jewish folklore, a golem is an animated anthropomorphic being that is created entirely from inanimate matter, usually clay or mud. I believe these things are real, but this is witchcraft. This is Kabbalistic black magic. They form these demon clay monsters and they make them basically do their bidding. In Sumerian mythology, the gods Enki or Enlil create a servant of the gods, humankind, out of clay and blood. See Enki and the making of man. Once again, Enki is the same as Ea, which is pronounced Yah. In another Sumerian story, both Enki and Ninmah create humans from the clay of the Abzu, the fresh water of the underground. They take turns in creating and decreeing the fate of the humans. In the Babylonian creation epic Enuma Elish, the goddess Nin Hersag creates humans from clay. According to Egyptian mythology, the god Khnum creates human children from clay before placing them into their mother's womb. In Greek mythology, according to Suda Apollodorus, Prometheus molded men out of water and earth. Near the town of Panopeus, the remaining used clay was allegedly still present in historical times as two cart-sized rocks that smelled like a human body. Myths about Prometheus were inspired by Near Eastern myths about Enki. Well, it's the same pagan religion. If we're going to look at it accurately, the Greco-Roman religions are the exact same with different names. It's pretty much the exact same thing with the Greek and the Babylonian myths. They all have the exact same pantheon of fallen angel gods. And, it's like the Queen of Heaven, Ashtoreth, is the same Queen of Heaven, Ishtar, and it's the same Queen of Heaven the Catholics worship when they say that they're venerating Mother Mary. Well, you're not supposed to pray to humans. You're supposed to pray to God. So if you're worshiping the Queen of Heaven, you're worshiping Ishtar. Also in Greek mythology, Prometheus molds a clay statue of Minerva, the goddess of wisdom to whom he is devoted, and gives it life from a stolen sunbeam. Pandora from Greek mythology was fashioned from clay and given the quality of naive grace combined with feeling. In Zoroastrian mythology, first the primordial ox Gavevodata and subsequently the primordial human are created from mud by the supreme deity Ahura Mazda. The Epic of Gilgamesh, Enkidu is created by the goddess Aruru out of clay to be a partner for Gilgamesh, mighty in strength. According to Chinese mythology, Nuwa molded figures from the yellow earth, giving them life and the ability to bear children. According to Hindu mythology, Parvati, the mother of Ganesha, created her son from clay and turned the clay into flesh and blood. According to some Laotian folk religion, There are stories of humans created from mud or clay. In Hawaiian tradition, the first man was composed of muddy water, and his female counterpart was taken from his side parts. The story may be partially or entirely Christianized. How is this possible if this legend would have been, like when did Hawaii get colonized? Like 200 years ago, maybe? Are you telling me they don't remember their own history before 200 years? It was Christian. I understand like 1,000 years you could say it was Christianized. You're telling me they forgot their mythologies just 200 years ago? They adopted a brand new pagan myth, and it sounds just like the biblical story. The Maori people, who are cannibals who do human sacrifices, by the way, in New Zealand, this is the truth. When you see them do that haka dance where they chant in their pagan language and they like stick their tongues out, that is a war chant of a cannibal people. So keep that in perspective. The Maori people believe that Tane Mahuta, god of the forest, created the first woman out of clay and breathed life into her. According to Inca mythology, the creator god Viracocha formed humans from clay on the second attempt of creating living creatures. In North mythology, humans are made from sand and tree trunks. In the Korean Sengut narratives, humans are made from red clay. According to the beliefs of some indigenous Americans, the Earthmaker formed the figure of many men and women, which he dried in the sun and into which he breathed life. In the Quiche creation story Popol Vuh, which also includes the Great Flood, the first humans are made of clay, although they soak up water and disintegrate. Central Asian mythology, including Altaic and Mongolian, have stories about how the god Olgan created the first man Erlik from clay floating on the surface of water. Woyangi in what's an Ija? I've never heard that word before in my life, but maybe it's some sort of Asiatic. He created humans from earth that fell from the sky before granting them identities. The Ainu historically believe that Kamui built the Ainu on the back of a giant fish using clay, sticks, and water. The beer whore of India believed that a leech was responsible for bringing the creator god mud, which would later be used to make humans. The Gondi people believed that Nantu, the moon, was made of mud, and Kampara spat onto his son. The Efe people have a creation story in which the first man was made of clay and skin. According to the Malagasy mythology, the sky deity and the earth deity created the Malagasy people by breathing life into clay dolls. Tane in Polynesian mythology created the original woman from red clay. The Garo people in India believe... Not one of them says we come from monkeys. Do you notice that? Not one of them says, oh yeah, so we used to be monkeys, and then the monkeys got smart, and that monkey that was really smart was my grandpa. Not one of them. Not one of them says we come from monkeys. They say we come from clay. All over the world, we come from clay, and God or gods got mad at us, so they flooded us. So this confirms the Bible. If all the pagan myths sound like corruptions of the Bible, it means that all the pagan myths come from a centrally true story, and we have to figure out which of the pagan myths, which mythology is true. Is it the Jewish mythology, or is it the Sumerian mythology? Which one is it? Well, let's see which god is still worshipped in the open. Which gods are worshipped underground by secret societies because their gods got their asses kicked by my god. I don't hear much about those Egyptian gods after Moses judged them. God judged the Egyptian gods and Egypt in the days of Moses. He said it. I will bring judgment upon the gods of Egypt. So that's what happens. A beetle gave clay to the creator god who made humanity from it. Polynesian mythology, original woman from red clay. Aymaran creation myth, making humans from clay. Songhai people, creation myth involving two gods creating humans out of clay as part of a rivalry. Buratian mythology, the god Sombov created humans from clay and wool. Dinka of Sudan believe that the creator formed the humans Abuk and Garang from clay. Clay was put into pots to grow and eventually came out as fully grown adults. Other narratives attribute the creation of humanity to this guy blowing his nose or believe that humans came from the sky and were placed upon a river as full-grown humans. The Dogon people believe the earth goddess was made when Amma flung earth into the primordial void. Two bird spirits from Bornean myth created humans from clay and the sound of their own voices. Inupiat mythology has Raven create a human out of clay, who later become Tornak, the first demon. Andamanese mythology, women were fashioned from clay, while the men emerged from split bamboo. Vietnamese mythology, Ngak Hoang and the 12 Ba Mu created people from clay. Parmal, the god Thor, encounters a giant named Mokur Kalve, who is made from clay. So, That not one of these stories says we came from monkeys and the monkeys came from rats and the rats came from amphibians and the amphibians came from fish and the fish came from plankton. Not one of these myths says anything like this. Now, the superheroine Wonder Woman was sculpted from clay by her mother Hippolyta and given life by the Greek gods. Yes, this is actually a myth about the Amazonians. So this is actually a Black Sea people. I don't know about the being made from clay part, but it does say that they were basically an offshoot of the Greek pantheon. So read your Bible. All the pagan myths actually confirm the Bible's accurate. All the scientific discoveries actually confirm the Bible's accurate. Unless you don't believe in real science, you believe that boys and girls aren't a real thing. You can be whatever gender you want to. The climate's going to be destroyed in a few years. What else? Climate change is an existential threat. Boys and girls don't exist. And aliens live on other planets and they're going to come visit us. Also, we've been to the moon. Even though the footage looks completely faked, we totally went to the moon. Don't ask questions why Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey movie looks far more realistic than anything we've ever seen in any of these space launches. Like, honestly, watch 2001 A Space Odyssey from like 1968 and then compare that to the moon landing footage you see from even like the new ones from India. They're not even trying to make it look believable. All they're doing is making this very obvious fake moon landing footage and then gaslighting us into believing that if we don't believe it, we're like, oh, you don't believe in science? Like, I don't believe in your scientists because your scientists are pagans. God bless.